Hi, Seth.
Hey, Brandon, what's up?
Nothing much. I wanted to talk to you about Wes Anderson. What do you think?
You want to talk about who?
Wes Anderson.
Oh, speaking of that guy, I have a song for you.
What do we
Check
got?
out this bad boy.
Oh, wow. You did a banjo jingle.
Yes, I did. So if you can hear this, check this out. Inten, intentionally, Wes Anderson, Wes Anderson.
That sounded like the kids at the banjo class who were first learning their first song on banjo.
Screw you, man. I'm great at
And
banjo. I've been practicing for at least 5 minutes to write that song.
and what are the words?
Intent, intentional, intentionally, Wes Anderson, Wes Anderson.
So just building as we go.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's the theme for this week. This week's episode of Intentionally Wes Anderson, and where we're looking over Royal Tenenbaum. For any previous viewers, whoever might be out there, we have so far covered Rushmore and Isle of Dogs. And for
Yep.
Isle of Dogs, I threw down a gauntlet to Seth that we have to come up with a theme song each week. My previous one was a little 7-second one on guitar, and then Seth's one now is one on banjo, introducing this conversation.
Yeah, yeah. So now the challenge is back on you for next week. Yeah. So here's the thing. I watched Royal Tenenbaums last night, and I got the Criterion collection. Ooh,
Me too.
fancy. I got it from the library though. I don't own it because I'm not Mr. Moneybags like you. And man, there was so the first when we did Rushmore, I took notes, to try to just recall things. I didn't do it for Isle of Dogs. I knew you weren't going to watch it because you didn't have time to watch it. You're on vacation. I didn't take notes last night, but I kept thinking through. I was like, oh my God, I need to be taking notes because there is so much stuff here. Like, I think we could talk about this for hours.
Yeah.
We could almost go scene by scene, like I don't know where to start. Like every single scene has like so much going on. You talk about the actors and the acting and the dialogue and the shot and the music and the colors and it's overwhelming almost.
It's a great film, and there's a warm and fuzzy feeling that comes on when I put it in the DVD player and when it ends. So
Yeah.
Starting with the beginning, let's just say we open up with a library book, which
is cool, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you're reading the story, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's Wes Anderson's hands as he does that, which is, he said in the commentary, they filmed that later because the books look too much like wallpaper. So he had to set that scene up so the viewer would know that we're looking at books.
Oh, okay.
When they do like the panel of books, every time they're introducing a work that someone has written, it just looks like wallpaper unless you know that those are books.
Okay, yeah.
So they open that up with Wes Anderson in a library, someone checking it out, which kind of is similar to Grand Budapest Hotel, where it begins with looking at the author's work at the cemetery, if you remember that.
I don't remember that. I've only seen that once, I think.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that when that comes.
Yeah. So they must have made it they must have created that book and made like the whole like image cover for it and all of that, that's really neat.
As well as I would assume they did that because at some point, or they probably just did the cover, but at some point in the movie, you actually see Margot reading Henry's book, A Guy Accounting for Everything. You can see her in the background reading it.
I didn't even notice this, but there's a literary theme. So Eli, played by Owen Wilson, is an author, and they show his books, which are the artwork on all of them is great. And then there's Bill Murray's character, his books being Dudley, or whatever.
Dudley's World.
Dudley's World. It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like tons of and then there's Etheline.
Family of Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, it's so good.
So just a little bit of trivia. Raleigh St. Clair is based on Oliver Sacks. And do you know Oliver Sacks is the I guess you would say neuroscientist. He wrote The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. He wrote that book.
Yeah, I do.
And Musicophilia, which you probably read.
Oh, I do know that guy now. I went to a
Yeah.
Barnes & Noble to look for some of his books. Yeah.
And then Eli's character is supposed to be based on a more average Cormac McCarthy kind of person.
Okay, so I told you before how I saw this movie in high school and I didn't understand it at all. But I remember telling people the next day, because I watched with a couple of friends, then we met up with other friends the next day, like you do in high school. And they asked us about it. And I remember we were like, well, it wasn't very good. But this one scene, and we went for like 30 minutes. I'm like, but this one scene, and then this other scene, it was like hilarious. And you start going, maybe it was actually pretty funny. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that was one of them when he's walking down the hall and he goes, everyone knows that General Custer died at the Battle of Little Bighorn, but this book presupposes that. Maybe he didn't.
Which that's something I want to talk about actually before we go too far. So let's talk about how you're talking about how do we start with this film since there's so many great things. Yeah. And this is Wes Anderson. I think the film came out when he was 32 years old. So think about that feat of accomplishment of making this film in his 30s and probably writing it in his late 20s. Yeah. So we start with what I can only term a musical montage, I guess.
We should even pause at that. I mean, when I saw this film, I wasn't familiar with the Beatles yet, so I didn't know that was a version of Hey Jude playing. And now I hear it, and there's something about the whole movie that's comforting. We talked about the books earlier and the library and this big house. We could talk about the big house, the tons of rooms, and everybody's coming and going all the time. Yeah. But like just that theme, the music is great throughout. But that I don't even know who did that version of Hey Jude, but it's so like. It's like nostalgic and comforting and almost like harkens to like the innocence of childhood, Yeah.
And as soon as he let Mordecai go, you hear the Hey Jude, you hear that part come in.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great first scene and it's very, it's a great first scene and it's unique in how it approaches the beginning of a film. So you have the library book setting up the prologue, I guess is what it is before we get into chapter 1. And then you have this introduction of characters. But right after the musical introduction or the musical montage, you have another introduction of characters where you're actually seeing the stars who play them. Yeah. Right. So you have that little pizzicato violins.
Yeah, that music is great too.
That's Ravel, apparently.
Who?
Ravel. Have you ever listened to Ravel?
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I thought it was Benjamin Britten because it sounded like something that Wes Anderson used in Moonrise Kingdom. But on the commentary, he said it's Ravel. But anyway, so yeah, we had this. Now we're introduced to all the cast through this little thing, and then we end up. The movie actually begins with Richie writing to Eli, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He's on the boat.
Okay. So now sorry.
Well, did you notice when they're doing so first of all, that initial thing with the Hey Jude thing going underneath is like. Fascinating storytelling, family of origin stuff, right? And you get these great scenes where like Royal's telling the kids about the divorce and he's at the other end of that long table. Like think about if you're a dad, you sit on like a couch to have this conversation. But it's like that scene in Batman where Michael Keaton is at the other end of the table because he has no idea how to act like a human being, So there's just a lot of really great scenes and all of that. But then it just sums it up so well, after 2 decades of betrayal, mistrust, and utter failure, or disaster, or whatever, all memory of the Tenenbaums was erased from the public or whatever.
Yeah. So this was a story that Wes Anderson wanted to start with the idea of children who peak in childhood, or people who peak in childhood, and then it's just all downhill. Yeah. He thought that was really interesting to explore. And that's basically what the story is. You see these very successful people, Margot with her plays, Chaz with whatever business, whatever industry thing he's doing, no one knows. And then Richie with tennis and, average, these kind of paintings or whatever. And then you see them all that, like you said, those years of betrayal that leads to the downfall that we're catching up at about 20 years later.
Yeah. Yeah.
So were you going to say something else?
Well, I was going to say, so from there, which is like this great opening, then you talked about the introduction of the characters and the actors as the characters. and they're all staring right at the camera, which is really great. I guess that most of them are meant to be looking in the mirror, you know, but
Yeah.
like they're just staring right at you. And aside from like the quirkiness of the framing of all those shots, like Bill Murray, I was trying to think, this is one of the most unique characters he's played. It's exact opposite of what he played in Rushmore. And does he have any other roles with a beard and glasses? Like I don't recall anything else where he has a beard. He's like this really soft-spoken, gentle, unconfident character, and I can't think of another role he did like that.
Yeah, I don't know of one. At least not in the Wes Anderson.
I mean, I can't think of any. I mean, he's done a ton of movies, obviously, but you know,
Yeah.
I kept thinking like, have I almost have to remember this is Bill Murray because this seems so unlike Bill Murray.
I felt the same when I was watching Garfield.
Man, that's a great line just from another movie, by the way, from what's the
Zombieland?
Yeah, Zombieland. You have any regrets? Garfield, maybe.
Maybe Garfield. All right, so since this one's such a big one and such, I feel like this is canon. This is Wes Anderson canon, you know. Let's just maybe talk about favorite moments.
Okay, that's a good way. Yeah.
So I'll start with since we said the musical montage, a favorite moment is Margot does her play on her 11th birthday and Royal just criticizes the crap out of it. And as soon as he's done, they start singing happy birthday.
Man, his whole like disconnect with thing. You mentioned this at Rushmore, like all these sort of this theme in Wes Anderson movies of male figures, father figures who are just disconnected and arrogant and whatever. And like Gene Hackman does this so well. Like he has no. Well, the characters just weren't believable. You're just kids on a stage. Like, dude, to say that to your 11-year-old daughter, like.
And then as soon as he crushes her spirits, somehow everyone comes together and starts going.
Yeah, no one goes happy, you know, to start the thing off. It just everybody starts singing spontaneously.
Yeah. Oh man, I just to write something like that, that's so. I don't even know how to describe that. That's so quirky, and just that you would go from that scene, and you can actually see Gene Hackman's face where he realizes what he's just done to his daughter, and then starts singing "Happy Birthday," and he's like, "Happy Birthday." So that's number one for me, or not number one, but that's one of them.
One of the early ones, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Gene Hackman. We should pause on him for a second because I meant to bring it up. I have another Wes Anderson book. So I showed the accidentally Wes Anderson book last week. There's another one that Chelsea got me a couple Christmases ago that is like, it's just for like the first 4 films of Wes Anderson talking about how he filmed it. It's like an interview between him and another guy, and it has these really big shots of different stills from the first few movies. And in that one, most of it's kind of uninteresting, but one of the more juicy things is that he talks about Gene Hackman, and who's a really weird person to be an actor in a Wes Anderson film.
Yeah.
And apparently Gene did not like being there. He did not want to be in the movie.
Yeah.
He was regularly complaining about things and refusing to do what Wes Anderson wanted him to do. And I think he felt like he was underpaid. And
oh, really?
Yeah, it's really weird stuff that was going on. But, you know, I was watching this thinking of that and going, dude, you can't tell in his acting. He is perfect in this role. Like he is nailing every scene in just a totally unique way.
I remember reading that at some point Wes Anderson had actually written it specifically for Gene Hackman. And when he told Gene Hackman that, Gene Hackman was like, I wish you wouldn't have done that. You know, he wasn't happy about it. But Gene Hackman actually did win the Golden Globe for this movie.
Did he?
So, yeah.
For like as best lead actor or whatever?
I would assume so, yeah.
Man. I always get Golden Globe and Academy Awards and all that stuff mixed up. It's all just kind of whatever to me.
But another interesting thing about, you know, Gene Hackman's role is this one scene with him and Ethel, where he actually comes to tell her that he needs to move back in, basically, but comes up with a lie that he's dying. Ethel hits him, or Angelica Houston. That looks real.
Yeah.
And you can hear, I think I almost hear Gene Hackman come out because he goes, damn, and then kind of comes back from it. But it sounds like that was not planned. It's yeah.
That whole scene is great. He like ambushes her, like she's like walking around, he's like, hey, and it just jumps out.
Yeah.
And then like he tells her, and that was another thing I found funny, even on the first watching. I didn't really understand the movie. It's like he tells her the lie that he's gonna die soon. She starts weeping, which is weird because they're estranged. Yeah. And then he's like, I think he feels remorse. He goes, I'm not really dying. And she's like, you bet, you know, whatever, and hits him
Lays into him.
and storms off, which is understandable. But then he says, no, I am dying. And then she comes back. And then the end of the scene, well, are you dying? Or are you or aren't you? And he's like, what?
Yeah.
Dying? Like, what do you mean what? Like,
but that does remind me, did you ever hear with Fight Club that what's his name? What's the guy?
Edward Norton?
Yeah, Edward Norton actually took a punch at Brad Pitt. Him and David Fincher talked about it, but Brad Pitt didn't know this punch was coming. So he actually went in and laid into him. And you can see Brad, I think that's the cut that's in the movie. You can see Brad Pitt's reaction to really being hit. That's what that reminded me of, is that, and in Gene Hackman, I mean, I really think that was real. I don't think that was fake, because it was pretty hard.
Yeah, it's pretty hard.
He jumped right back up into it, and so did Angelica Houston.
Yeah. Man, that's a cool story about Fight Club. We could do another like episode on just Fight Club, but of course that'd be a David Fincher series.
Yeah, we'd have to do a David Fincher, intentionally David Fincher.
Intentionally David Fincher.
So what's the favorite moment for you? We'll just go back and forth.
So, honestly, just kind of the whole movie. You know, there are scenes, there's this whole world. We talked before about how Wes Anderson intentionally sort of crafts this environment and world that you kind of go into that's apart from the other worlds. I mean, part of it's just how it transcends time. And we talked about that before, how, you know, there's not cell phones or anything like that in there. And it feels like, you see how shitty the cabs look when they take those cabs. They look like they're 70s cars, but they're really run down. So it might be the 90s, but and you know, he did film this, I think, in about 2000 or so, but you know, it also, but you get a hint of like it being newer when they get on the bus. The bus looks like, the public bus looks just like public buses look now, 20 years later, but so many things look like they're like the 70s, like everything's super simple. And it sort of made me long, just that whole world. It made me long for this like thing where this space and this world where things aren't so commercial and superficial. Like even when they're at the cemetery and they're visiting the grave sites, like things just look normal, and there's like the walls are kind of falling apart, you know, and there's like these retaining walls and stuff set up that are crumbling. And I feel like if you go now, it's like some brand new concrete and it's got some kind of nicely painted safety railing, and it's like nothing. It's weird to say, I long for things to look run down.
Yeah, that kind of old charm.
Yeah, they've got like older charm to it. I mean, that movie is full of just things that have sort of a pre-modern charm to them, you know.
He did say he wanted to film in New York, but he didn't want it to be a New York movie. So, and there's one scene where Pagoda is telling Royal that Henry has asked Etheline to marry him.
Yeah.
And in that scene, Pagoda is standing in front of the Statue of Liberty, according to what Wes Anderson says in the commentary. And Gene Hackman was upset about that. He was saying, why are you covering up the Statue of Liberty? He should be to the side. And he was kind of challenging him on that. But it's interesting to think about that, because this is a movie that takes place in New York, but you never really know that it's New York.
They never say it explicitly.
Yeah.
Although, to be honest, as soon as like, you know, he goes to the 135th Street Y, like that's such a New York thing. Like you don't have 135th Y in any other city, you know? Yeah. So
375th West. I need to get some glasses that I can point up when I correct you.
Oh.
375th Street Y.
Is it really 170? Is that what it is? Yeah.
375th.
But you know, when they're like working out, the kids, or Ari and Uzi are working out, like does that kind of place even exist anymore? They're like in a huge cage, like an outdoor, looking kind of run down with like just like run down workout equipment, you know, that's not electric, you know, and they're like doing these dumb stretches. God,
that's certainly a world that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I mean, if it does, it's in no neighborhood I've visited, but maybe I just don't go to the right neighborhoods. So we could pause there with Ari and Uzi and their jumpsuits that match their dads, and how weird it is for Ben Stiller to be in a Wes Anderson film, and how much he is like. Did you ever see the movie Heavyweights when you were a kid?
Mm-hmm. Well, no, yeah, I did. It was like a fat camp, right?
Yeah, fat camp.
Yeah.
And he's like
Yeah.
the psychotic health nut,
Oh, really?
Ben Stiller acts like this. So in Heavyweights, he's like workout guru, psycho, making everybody eat all these things and outline candy and, making them do so many sit-ups and stuff. But it's a very similar character to what he plays in this film, especially with the jumpsuits and everything that he's wearing.
I would assume there's probably a little bit more love in this character because he's doing it from a place of not his insecurities, but his feelings of. I mean, his whole world's been torn apart with that plane crash, so it's more. He wants to keep everyone safe.
Yep. Yeah. And and there again, Royal Tenenbaum totally missing the point. And when he says the name of his wife, he's like, what's his wife's name? Do you remember?
Rachel.
He's like, Rachel's buried there too. And he's like, who? My
Yeah.
wife. He goes,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we got it. And then when they're there, he's like, oh yeah, we have another body here. It's like the most irreverent thing you could
But
imagine.
later, for some redemption, later in the movie, when he goes to the cemetery by himself, he's standing just at Rachel's tomb.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So instead of going to his mother's, he's put a bunch of flowers in front of Rachel. So that's a little, detail about the slow redemption of Royal, or him kind of realizing he's insensitive.
Yeah, he does have a redemptive arc. It takes like basically the entire movie to get there.
Yeah, it's only till the last 10 minutes that you see a turn.
Yeah.
If that. All right, so another favorite moment, you talked about the buses in New York. Another favorite moment, which I think anyone would recognize this, but the green bus line when Margot gets off the bus.
And it like
these
stops.
days, yeah.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Just the choreography, you can see some of the sailors walking behind him who are kind of walking in match. I mean, they match as they walk.
Yeah.
And that, and just her face and the music, so good.
So there's a song that plays when she gets off. It's quiet for just a few seconds, and then who is that?
That's Nico. It's a cover of a Jackson Browne song called "These Days" by Nico.
Nico has such a weird voice. Like, it is so odd.
This is what's interesting is she used to be. I was thinking, who was it? Velvet Underground that had the Andy Warhol CD cover. She used to be part of Velvet Underground, and I think they eventually kicked her out because she was tone deaf in one ear. And so that really explains her timbre and, the way that she sings.
Her timbre is just that's the weird thing. Like, she's not off pitch. It's just the way she like does those, her diction, or whatever, her words.
She's just a little bit, though. It's like a sitar, it's just like a little bit off.
Yeah. It's so odd. It's definitely distinctive, which is probably why part of the reason she made a name for herself, because it's, no one else sings like that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure there's another song with her later in the movie.
There is, yeah. I don't know the name of that one, but I think it's also a Jackson Browne cover too.
Okay. So that musical moment is really interesting. And like I said, the music throughout is great, but there's another moment when Gwyneth Paltrow's character, what's her name? Margot, yeah. When Margot is leaving Raleigh St. Clair's place, and I forget what is playing then, but it's really
Christmas time is here. I'm so glad you brought it up.
Vince Guaraldi.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought it up because that plays two times. It plays when she's leaving Raleigh St. Clair and when they're having ice cream. And I think that would be one of my complaints about the movie. I just don't think playing Christmas time is here while they're eating ice cream is such a weird choice.
So maybe it strikes me differently than you, or maybe than most people, but for whatever reason, and I can't exactly say why, that album by Vince Guaraldi, I listen to it a lot, and it really is nostalgic for me. So it fits perfectly in this movie. I didn't like grow up watching those Charlie Brown movies all the time or anything, so I don't know why it evokes that emotion in me. But when I hear it, it totally fits that, like, the whole world is like this. So the Tenenbaums' house is like this giant house with like innumerable rooms, and you notice that it's like everybody has leisure time. No one's ever like at work and just coming home to shop. Like, everyone's there all the time. It's like Margot walks in and Eli is just popping out of the closet. Like there's just it's almost like they're on perpetual vacation, and there's just people sort of moving in between these halls, and there's just all these different unique spaces and stuff, and it's like this comforting, nostalgic childhood feeling. And that song, as well as Hey Jude and all these other musical pieces in the movie, just sort of make that a larger, expansive, warm sort of environment. So
That's a good point. I mean, I guess when you talk about Wes Anderson transcending time, that song doesn't transcend Christmas to me. And then to kind of put that Christmas feeling onto this time when it's clearly not Christmas at all.
well, but there is snow in
At the end. Yeah.
I mean, are you sure it's not Chris? I don't know why they're getting ice cream. Are you sure it's not around Christmas time, or at least
There's no season that's ever announced, really.
Oh yeah,
They all wear the same clothes throughout.
well, kind of, but then okay, so it's weird because like at least for part of it, it seems like summer. They're like going swimming, and when Royal's taking Arya and Uzi around, and they're hopping on the garbage truck, and they're not super warmly clad. But then there's other scenes where it's snowing and they're kind of bundled up. So maybe it must be like late fall, where like occasionally there's still some warm days, but I don't know.
Yeah. I'm gonna put in, because I took some notes while I was doing it. So I'll introduce my favorite moments sparsely, but I did want to speak about this movie does a great job with diversity. So you have Danny Glover as a main character, and then you have Pagoda, which is Kumar Palini, who started with Bottle Rocket as just he wasn't an actor. Is it Palini? Kumar Palani. But both of those are essentially main characters, right?
Danny Glover.
Well, actually, this would bring up a good question. Is there a main character in the movie?
Well, because of the name of the movie, you'd probably have to say Royal Tenenbaum, but
it's plural though. The Royal Tenenbaums.
Right. Which, by the way, is that a hearkening to like, sometimes when my grandma writes letters to us, she'll say Mr. and Mrs. Seth Hecox, which is kind of odd. That's an old way of doing that. Do you think that's what Wes Anderson is doing? Like, rather than Mr. and Mrs. Royal Tenenbaum, it's like the whole family is the Royal Tenenbaums.
I always thought that it was a clever wordplay. So it's the Royal Tenenbaums, using royal in its original sense, not the pronoun.
Right. Okay. That's probably right, but I thought of that last night. Okay, hold on. You asked about something else for a sec. Oh, Pagoda.
Diversity.
I don't know that there's a main character necessarily. And Danny Glover is a much more prominent character. Pagoda seems like a pretty minor character, but that was one of those scenes that I remember from the first viewing when I was in my teens, when he does the stat, he tells a story about himself, and then he said, and they're like, who rescued him? He did, like he's the one who stabbed him and rescued him. And then when he does it again, he pulls out that tiny little pocket knife, and the blade is like an inch long.
Yeah. All right. So speaking about, I'm going to transition to Danny Glover, but some of my favorite moments are when he's talking about something that is emotionally vulnerable and he makes a fool of himself. This happens 3 times. The first time he asks Etheline to marry him, you go and see Etheline's previous suitors, and then there's a close-up of Danny Glover's face, and there's the tissue from the shaving. From where he cut himself. The second is when he talks to him again on the archaeological site, and he just falls down. Oh, God. And then the third is he comes in after Richie's suicide and says, "How can I help?"
And the tie.
His tie is so.
I kind of thought, how do they film that? Because there's stuff that happens before that, and he had to like, did they rig it maybe to like already put in there? I mean, that's hard. That would be hard to do.
Or you take it out and you hook on to something, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, but it is really endearing. Like you quickly realize like he's the most genuine character in the film. Everybody else is this self-absorbed, arrogant sort of situation, but he's just like, he's genuinely there to help. In fact, that's a great line when he comes in, "How can I help?" Like that's what you ought to say in a situation. He's the only one that understands that stuff. Yeah. And even when Chaz says, "I'm a widower too," he goes, "I know, Chaz." Yeah. I know you are, Chaz. Yeah. Let's see. Some other favorite moments. Oh, when the fake doctor says you need to continue the stomach cancer medication. Rusty is such a great character in there. Like you can tell he's totally Royal's buddy and willing to help out, but like I love at the end they have that great scene about the eye with Luke Wilson's character Richie, and he's like, let me know if it spreads the other eyes.
And they just take it. He's completely take on the role.
So good.
Let's see some other favorite moments. One you mentioned is where everyone thinks that Custer died of Little Bighorn, so that's another one of mine.
Yeah.
We have the scene that you talked about with Ari and Uzi and Royal, where me and Julio down by the schoolyard, which is
that's so great. When that song comes on, that's so perfect.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I mean, it's one of my favorite Paul Simon songs anyway, but like that, it was just a genius. And like, they're going around like that whole line from Royal when he's on the phone, I'm talking about mixing it up and cutting, just putting a brick through the other guy's window. Like, I hate to say, like, that is not too terribly removed from like how I view. I just hope I'm not quite as selfish about it as Royal is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think so. Ethel says you need to breed some, or Royal says you need to breed some recklessness in them. Ethel says, I think that's horrible advice. Royal says, no, you don't. And then that's when me and Julio starts. But I think that's kind of true. I think kids need to. My favorite is when the "Don't Walk" sign comes on and they run across.
That was like everything else. I was like, that'd be fun. I can't imagine doing that with my own kids, much less someone else's kids. Like, it look and I don't know how they filmed that, but it seriously looks like they're going to get run over like that. I'm sure they, told the drivers, this is what we're doing. Don't run over them. But it looks like it's awfully
pretty close. Yeah.
Everything
I think except for the dog fight, I think is kind of like, it's a good idea just so children don't feel so scared, and they can. I actually think that's good advice. Breed some recklessness. Recklessness.
We named our kids middle names of Wolf and Bear. And I remember
I didn't know Adley was Bear.
Why? And I was like, well, I kind of want them to have a fuck you streak in them, like they need some sort of viciousness, I think, because
some badness.
The world's gonna fuck them up if they're not able to sort of have that wildness in them, So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So here's another one. So we have Eli's interview where he's stoned, and they say Wildcat wasn't a big success.
Wildcat.
And then what does he say? That's perfect.
Well, his response?
Yeah. Do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, that just how he kind of like drifts off, And
well, he says Wildcat was written in an obsolete vernacular.
I do like that one. It's just how he like fades on. Wildcat. Yeah. And then he like gets up and leaves, and Royal's like, well, what kind of hell of a way is that to act, And
but I also think if anyone ever criticizes you in the future for doing a sermon, just say it was written in the obsolete vernacular.
Obsolete vernacular. Yeah. That is honestly though, to be honest, that is not a terrible way to understand. I think a lot about generational divides and stuff like that. And I think vernaculars go obsolete way faster than like old English to current English,
Yeah, probably.
I think they go obsolete at this. I mean, things speed up through history, or at least that's how I understand it. So I think vernaculars go obsolete between boomers and millennials, and probably are going to between millennials and Gen Z, And that's kind of a pretty, there's probably some authors who would say like some of their early works are in an obsolete vernacular compared to, and I actually think now, especially in the pandemic, I've often remarked, as much as I like reading any book that came out before the pandemic, just especially nonfiction, I just keep going like, well, it just seems like it has such less value because it's written about a world that doesn't exist anymore and probably never will again.
Yeah, it's a good point. Another scene I think is really interesting is the way that they chose to, or the music that they play when Royal's leaving the home. So they find out that he's been faking this whole, and that's right after Eli's interview. They find out he's been faking this whole thing. And if you listen, there's some really light, actually they said in the commentary, this is a Bob Dylan song taken from the Pat Garrett soundtrack or one of those.
I had that one. Yeah.
Okay.
It's some like Western movie that wasn't very popular.
Yeah. Is it all instrumental?
I don't think so, but maybe.
Okay. Well, I think the song that they used during that scene is apparently one of those, but it's a really light and there's no vocals, it's all instrumental, but it helps. For some reason, as you're listening to it, you don't hate Royal as much. I assume without that music, because you see Chaz get upset. You see Etheline say, "Why did you do this to us?" She's broke down from it. I don't remember if Margot and Richie actually respond to it. But through that whole thing, you have Alec Baldwin saying one of the most important lines, I think, is that the second he said it, he realized it was true.
Yeah.
And then you have that light music that really helps you not feel like this is a true asshole. This is just, he was just trying to get close to his family the best way he knew how.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at the end of that, my second, or actually, this might be my favorite line, but Richie says, "Dad, you weren't dying." And he goes, "But I'm going to live." I mean, that's humorous, but it's also really inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah.
Actually, as you're talking about your favorite scenes, I'm starting to think how like there's so many good scenes with Ben Stiller playing Chaz. Like when Royal first moves in, and Richie's like, "Well, he's already here anyway. I guess you can go up there and throw him out if you want." So Chaz does. He goes in there. He's like, "You got to get out of here." For all he knows, his dad is dying of cancer and laying in a bed. It looks like he has an IV hooked up to him, and you got to get out of here. And then Royal. It's another funny thing. Royal doesn't like push back and like, "Dude, I'm dying. Like I can't get out of." He's like, "Well, all right." So he starts moving and fakes falling down. But then throughout the whole thing, Chaz is like that. I love when they're talking about him moving back in or something, and Chaz gets upset, and Royal goes to Chaz starts to storm off, and Royal like, "Listen, watch that."
It seems like such a childish thing to do.
It's just, he does such a good job of playing like an extremely high-strung person where it's like, I don't have time for your nonsense.
Yeah.
And just like storms off in the most direct way possible,
So speaking of Chaz, the highlight of the movie is, and I'm getting more and more hyperbolic with my languages, but it's hard to narrow down things because there's so many good scenes.
Yeah.
But there's one right at the end of that long take where he adopts the new dog and he says to his dad, "I've had a rough year, Dad."
Yeah.
He says, "I know you have, Chazzy." That makes me cry every single time I watch it. You can just hear the emotion in Ben Stiller's throat. Yeah. And that's such an integral scene to Royal coming back into the family with this new dog, Spark. I think it's Sparky or Spark.
Yeah. And it's finally reconciliation with the kid who, I mean, he also like really estranged himself from Margot, but he obviously liked Richie the most, but Chaz and Margot, Chaz really was always the most, had the most animosity towards his dad, and for them to reconcile there at the end, and then him be there when Royal has his heart attack and dies is really redemptive. But you're right. And what's interesting is that Royal's response to that line is the same as Henry's response earlier. Basically, "I know you are. I know you have."
Yeah, it's true.
It's a sort of understanding. Like finally, there's an understanding between them, and they see each other for who they are.
Yeah. Let's see, what else is there to talk? Oh, so here's another funny part is when Chaz is chasing Eli, and he pushes the priest down the stairs, and then it cuts to the scene, and you just see the priest slowly going down the stairs.
That conversation that Royal has with the priest before too, I remember it being so, thinking it was so funny. He says I'm half Jewish, but the kids are 3/4 Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know he means like Irish Catholic, who the priest obviously is, but it's so funny to me to imagine just saying to a Catholic priest, "My kids are 3/4 Catholic."
Yeah.
What
did you think of the?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I think there's a really telling scene when you speak of the relationship between Royal and Chaz, father and son. That BB gun fight seemed really central to their relationship. They're supposed to be, and it's kind of a microcosm of the whole thing, right? They're supposed to be on the same team, and Royal shoots him.
Yeah.
There was trust when they were kids, and Royal broke all the trust by not being on their team and betraying them and hurting them. And they never get over that until the end, because he never even acknowledges it or attempts to reconcile it.
Yeah.
Until the end. So
There's some more trivia where that actually happened between Owen Wilson and his brother Andrew Wilson, who Andrew Wilson is Margot's biological father that cuts her hand off.
Oh, with
That's
the big
Andrew
beard in
Wilson.
Indiana.
Yeah, but Owen Wilson shot him in real life, and it's his hand that they're looking at. So he has the BB lodged in his hand.
Oh, really? That was Owen
Yeah.
Wilson's hand. Yeah, because
No, Andrew Wilson. Andrew Wilson.
Oh, Andrew Wilson. Okay.
Yeah.
That scene too is great, just in Margot's character. I mean, her character is so enigmatic and fascinating, But when her finger gets chopped off, that scene, it happens, and she just goes like, that's it for her finger getting chopped off. She's not screaming. It's like she is so self-contained, that like that.
Or shut down.
What's that?
Or shut down.
I guess I don't know. I think there's a sense with her character that there's a ton of stuff happening internally, but she has no interest in giving anyone else an insight into that. Part of that's her secrecy about knowing no one knows that she smoked for 22 years, not even her husband. But it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's realistic and believable being in a family like that and being adopted, and then your dad always mentioning that you're adopted and being critical like that. I could like, that makes sense to me, that you would retreat and isolate and kind of keep it all inside, regardless of anything else.
So a brief ethical discussion: is it wrong to be in love with your stepbrother or stepsister?
Well, they're not step, right? They're adopted. So.
Oh yeah. So what's the terminology for that?
Just adopted sibling.
Adopted sister. Yeah.
I mean, actually, that conversation is probably pretty spot on between Royal and Richie on the rooftop when he's telling his dad. Actually, Royal has a good response to that. At first he's like, he says, "Well, it's not illegal, of course, but still frowned upon." He's like, "Well, what is it these days?" I thought that was kind of funny. And then he, Royal eventually comes around to like, you know what? Don't listen to me. Yeah. It was a really refreshing exchange and honest. And they're the only ones. Richie and I already said, Richie is his favorite, and it's obvious. But like, they seem like they have a decent relationship. Royal does kind of leverage him sometimes to get his own way, but for the most part, like, they're pretty honest and sincere with each other, and it's kind of valuable. But as far as the ethical aspect of it, I don't know. You're not biologically related, so I don't know.
So is thinking about a Wes Anderson film and a Hollywood film, do you want Richie and Margot to get together? Is there any inkling, or is there any kind of feeling in you that wants them to get together? Or are you okay that they're just secretly in love?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know that I was even necessarily rooting for that.
Yeah. It's so important to the plot, or it's so important to Richie and Margot's functioning in the family.
Yeah.
And so it's weird to think about, especially that scene after he shows his scars where they kiss and admit that they love each other. You're in it. I mean, you're there with them. But there's also, for me, there's no part of me that thinks, well, I wonder if they get together. I just don't. Yeah. I don't care if they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing to be indifferent about it, even though it's so important to how this family functions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I guess it's one of those things where in the Wes Anderson world, you don't necessarily root, or at least I don't find myself rooting for particular outcomes, In fact, because he seems like it's like an unrealistic world, but it has realistic sort of outcomes. I like at the end when they're sort of wrapping up what each person does afterward, that Margot writes a play, which is the victory in itself. When it says it comes out to mixed reviews, like, that's perfect. It's not like one of those cheesy movies like, and everybody loved it and it was a smashing success. Like, it just, it came out to mixed reviews. Like,
yeah.
But she finished the play. It's cool,
And that's something I want to talk about. You were saying that you watched this in high school and didn't really know how you felt about it. And I remember the first time I watched it thinking, this is really anticlimactic. But the more I think about it as I watch it, it's not. I mean, it may not be the Hollywood thing to where everyone gets what they want all of a sudden, but Royal in some sense did bring the family together.
Yeah.
So there is some kind of, and you also see the redemption of Royal, which is, if you look at, I mean, this would be a weird hero's journey, but there's some kind of basic storyline here that we're all familiar with, and tropes that have been used in Hollywood films. But at the end, it still feels anticlimactic. And I think that's because there's some realism there about Margot's play not doing well. Richie and Margot's relationship, you don't know what's going to happen there.
Right.
Royal, only Chaz saw him die. So was there redemption with other parts of the family? Did Margot ever heal? Or so it's anticlimactic while also being fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah. Satisfactory.
Which is a weird, I mean, that's a weird balance to have.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised he pulled it off, honestly.
Yeah. I could see that.
So would this be essential Wes Anderson to you?
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think this is, we talked about how he's in the first couple of movies, he's sort of establishing his type of thing. And I think this is the first one that he nails.
He nailed it.
In that world, right? Before we start wrapping up though, in a larger, looking at it in the larger context of the Wes Anderson filmography, I do want to say, just to go back to Bill Murray briefly, there's so many good scenes and lines with him, like the character being so unique, like I said, with the beard and the glasses, but also he's doing that work with Dudley and he does the whole like, make yours like mine, then he finishes it. It doesn't look at all like it. Or like when they go out to the cab and Dudley's like, that car has a dent in it.
Yeah. Where's that red one gonna go?
So it's like, just the weird thing is that the dialogue is great, but not at all like any other movie would have. And I'm not sure it's like real world dialogue, but it's just fascinating as these people say. They have like, it's like all these characters have this like built up stuff that they're finally letting out. So the dialogue doesn't move in a linear fashion. It's like you're talking about this, then suddenly you're talking about this, and like it's this weird sort of disjointed conversation every time.
And it still feels organic though.
Yeah, it does. And I think it's because these people are just trying to work out all of this stuff that's going on between them. There's this really complex multi-dimensional dynamic between all these characters, which is basically a family of origin and then a few attaching things around the family of origin. Yeah. And that's how conversations go when you're just like, hey, why didn't you do this? Or why were you always like this? And that's but it goes even into those interactions between non-family members like Dudley and Raleigh St. Clair. So.
Which speaking of Dudley and Raleigh St. Clair, I like the one where the audience member stands up and says, "Can the boy tell time?" Oh my, no. Oh. Yeah. And Dudley's going, no. Actually,
another good scene with him. Hold on, when Richie commits suicide, and I don't know why he's there, but he's running and he's just like completely blank faced and just like his head's just jostling around as he like jogs behind the stretchers as going through the hospital hall. That's another thing. Aside from the beard and the glasses, he like never shows emotion. Like even when he's talking to Margot, he goes, "Well, I want to die." Yes. It's a great line on its own, but also him rendering it totally expressionless is great.
Which you did a perfect segue, but there is one more thing I want to mention with Dudley, where Margot runs in and says, "Where is he?" And Dudley says, "Who?" So that it kind of gives you an idea of how his mind works. But I was going to ask, what did you think about the suicide scene? I mean, is that too bleak for this movie, or do you feel like it fit in?
Yeah, now it seems like it works better. When I first saw the movie, I just hadn't seen a lot of stuff like that. So it seemed really like, ugh. And, I still kind of get that way around those kind of scenes. And it's like, but it does. I mean, in some ways it makes sense that he just is at a total loss for like what to do and who he is. And it's also fascinating. I'd never noticed before. Doesn't he say into the mirror, "I'm going to kill myself tomorrow"? And then he like the next scene is him pulling the razor blade out and doing it now. And I'm not sure why that's the line in that series of events. Like, I don't know if maybe he is realizing it as he says it, that like the thought enters his mind, "I want to die." and then he realizes, well, I just do it now.
Yeah, that was my first thought. It was impulse.
Yeah.
But in the commentary, Wes Anderson said he borrowed that from another movie. I can't remember the name of the movie. He borrowed the line from the name of the movie, and then he actually went ahead and did the act. And Wes Anderson says, "I'm not sure why I did that," so he doesn't know either.
Okay.
But so Elliott Smith is playing "Needle in the Hay," which is a great song
That's a great
choice.
song. Yeah.
And that's the only song that's kind of post 2000s in the whole movie.
No, I think Needle in the Hay came out like 99.
Oh, did it? Okay, well, post, I guess, in the 90s. Maybe that's the only more recent song, because that would have been within 10 years when this released.
Yeah.
But I remember listening to it with my headphones, and you can actually hear they put in the little sound for what it would sound like if you were, cutting yourself with a razor.
In the recording, in the Elliott Smith recording?
No, not in the movie. Like they made, you know how they go back and do the sound later? They add in the sound.
Yeah.
Are you checking text while you're reading this, Seth?
No, I was looking up. So Needle in the Hay came out in 95.
Oh, 95, okay.
First 95. So it is, you're right, it's probably the most recent song used in there, but it's not like ultra modern. By the way, I've been listening to a lot of Elliott Smith recently.
Yeah.
I got Basement on a Hill as a CD from the library, and it's just stayed in my car CD player, and I've been playing it almost nonstop. But that was the first time I ever heard Elliott Smith, was watching that film.
Is Basement on the Hill the one before he died?
I don't know. Honestly, I would guess that because it's really dark and messy. Okay. But I don't know that. I actually was thinking the other day as I was driving around, I was like, I should find out where this falls in his catalog, because this feels like something that came out right before he committed, speaking of suicide.
Yeah. I have Either Or, and I think X and O. And both of those.
Yeah, I have both of those. Those are great. And Figure Eight's really good too.
Okay, so let's see. What are some other I think that's pretty much it that I wanted to talk about.
Well, yeah, I mean, at this point, we are almost an hour in. We should probably look at it in the larger context of, where it fits with everything. So you said earlier, is it essential? I said yes. I assume you'd say yes too.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
If you had to, is it your favorite Wes Anderson film?
Man, I think it's, every time I watch it, I say it's my favorite. But then after I watch Grand Budapest, I say that's my favorite.
So, well, let me just go ahead and break that tie for you. This is definitely a better movie than Grand Budapest. So,
according to you.
Yes, I am the authority on this subject.
You think you're the majority?
Authority.
Oh, authority.
I'm the authority on which are the definitive and best Wes Anderson films.
This is my favorite so far, for sure. Do you think a film like this could get made nowadays?
Oh, yeah. I mean, why not?
Well, I think this is made by Touchstone Pictures, which in the 2000s was a pretty big studio, right?
Oh, you mean like made by, with major release and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, on one hand, I would say no, because of the way that the industry works now. But, movies like Lady Bird come out, which I just watched recently, and it's not. In fact, I was thinking about how, like, some of those movies that came out around the time of Royal Tenenbaums, like Napoleon Dynamite, that would be hard to do now. I mean, you do have movies like Lady Bird and stuff that come out. And it's not often, but they happen, and they have, decently famous actors and actresses in them, and they do fairly well, and they have critical acclaim, and they're done by major studios. So, I don't see why it wouldn't. It just, it would be nice to see Wes Anderson do something like that again at some point, but that's okay.
What do you think this movie's about overall?
I mean, I think it's definitely, a lot of his are about family of origin issues, and this is, I guess actually this is the first one that is about family of origin, right? Because Rushmore only plays a little bit with the character and his dad. Yeah. It's more about the boys' world. In Bottle Rocket's about brothers, but I don't remember their parents. I didn't watch it recently, but I don't remember their parents or anything playing into it. But this is totally like everybody sort of dealing with the repercussions of what happened in their family of origin, how it's impacted them, and the messes it's made, and how they try to reconcile those things. And it goes on from here to sort of hit that theme with Fantastic Mr. Fox and Life Aquatic and Darjeeling Limited. All those have that same theme, and I find that a compelling theme. You know, you're into psychology and you're studying psychology. I mean, we know that whole like child is father of the man, like all that stuff that happens during your formative years begets who you are as an adult. So, you know, it's one of the more fascinating concepts you can even study, in my opinion.
Yeah, I like it just for the idea of seeing that you have child geniuses and what happens if someone does peak too early. How do they live up to these stresses that the family put on them to be great? And they struggle to throughout the movie. They struggle to live up to their reputation that they achieved in childhood.
I think it is the reputation piece. I don't the thinking of someone peaking early. I mean, I guess from like a success standpoint or a fame standpoint, yeah, and we see that happen with like child actors like Macaulay Culkin and those. But you know, I don't think it has to be that way. If society didn't treat them the way that they did, you know, it could work out differently.
I mean, Elijah Wood's a good example of it working out differently.
Was he a child actor?
Mm-hmm.
What was he in?
The only one I know, he did a lot of things, but he was in Back to the Future 2. He played just a kid in the Back to the Future 2. And I think he was wasn't he in the movie where Macaulay Culkin's brother is evil? You remember that movie?
I don't know which one that is.
Okay. He may not have been, but he was in some movies. Okay. More than just a minor role.
Okay.
But yeah, I feel like he turned out.
You're right. I mean, sometimes it does work out. But I actually, on a related theme, I worry about that with the kids from Stranger Things. Like, I think that they did a fantastic job acting, especially in season 1, you know? And you kind of feel empathy for them as actors and their characters in the show. But, man, you really hope that, like, they don't all end up, like, warped and like as they get older.
I feel like they did sexualize the girl a little bit, or Hollywood did.
Huh.
But we'll see how it turns out.
That has to be like that has to be a different discussion, but I guess I didn't notice that, but okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's it.
Okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your rating for Royal Tenenbaums?
I think a 9.3.
Did you smile because my voice cracked?
I was so close to picking. I was gonna say, so am I doing the rating or the rating? So there was a brief moment where I thought I could get him on this, but I already picked on the band thing. So.
Should have nailed me on it, man.
You got it. Are we doing a rating or? Yeah, I think 9.3.
You can't do 0.3. We have to do half. You either do 9 or 9.5. I can go easily say 9.5. I mean, it's pretty damn close to a 10. I mean, you know, if 10 ideally is perfection and you don't have any critiques, you know, what are the critiques you have for it that make it not a 10?
That's a good point. I'll say a 9.5 so we can wrap it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I think that's pretty much it. Later, next week, we're going to be talking about Life Aquatic. Mm-hmm. And I want to start bringing in some Rotten Tomatoes scores and discussing that too, because Life Aquatic is where it pretty much goes downhill.
Okay. Yeah, I'm interested in that. We can also talk about sort of career arc. You talked about children, stars, and peaking. You know, in my idea of Wes Anderson career arc, this is where he hits like his sustained peak that, in some ways, is still going, in my opinion. But this is definitely the beginning of that sort of situation. So. I'm glad you're gonna like write them down and, you know, pencil.
Yeah, or maybe share my screen so we can look at what the poll of the audience was as well as what the critics said, and then share our opinions on that.
Okay, I'll have to enable screen sharing when we do that then.
Yeah. Right. I'm Brandon Michael Williams,
and I'm Seth Andrew Hecox,
and together we're Intentionally Wes
Anderson. Nice, that's pretty good, right?
I didn't look good on my end, but we'll see.
Hey, if you watch the video from last week, we actually are in sync, and then you cop out on the Anderson, and for Intentionally Wes, we were totally in line. So, all right. Well, I'll see you next week. All right.
I'll see you next week.
All right. See you, man.
All right. Bye.
Bye.